I think from a qualitative perspective, there are only few North Stars or few things that we should be looking after. It always starts with the customer, and it always starts with what the customer wants. One of the things that many of the sales teams start is they start with their own product and their own offering, but we have to really start with the customer and think about what is it that they really need and how are we trying to fill that gap. So I think just making that connection with their overall marketing objectives or their overall gaps in the current offering that they have is a super powerful way of analyzing and assessing what do they need, right? And I think on the quantitative side, this goes a little bit more into research, and a lot of the sales teams these days are backed by a team of analysts, a team of data scientists who actually help look at the signals that extend much beyond like the obvious ones. But here are a few that I definitely encourage to look at. One is the overall growth rates that the business is having right now. And it's important to assess where they are in their journey. Are they just getting started, or are they in that hyper growth phase, or are they actually in a decline phase? And how do you kind of read through their balance sheets, if they're a public company, through their kind of quarterly reports, and find out where they are gaining and where they are losing, and how does your offering fit into that? And then the last part I say, which is both qualitative and quantitative, is in understanding the industry, right? You're not talking to the customer as a single entity, but they are operating in an ecosystem which could be very different from the company that's selling into it. So it's very, very important to understand what the industry interplays are, what the major players are, and how do we bring them all together to create a very compelling and unique offering for all players that we're talking to. Sure. So I think here at Google, a lot of focus is given on the user and what the users need. And it ties back to the point that I was making earlier. We are trying to make it easier, convenient for the customer to meet their own objectives, and to just kind of look at different signals to see, would your product even be relevant to the segment that you're targeting, right? So what I think I would think is a good practice is looking at the different kinds of signals, like the business models, like the growth aspirations, market targeting, or even the segment targeting. And turns out that there are cases where your product may or may not be relevant. So I think it's about being very intentional about where does it fit, and just focus on that versus kind of going through the whole set and trying to sell it to everybody. So we deal in my role, we deal with millions of advertisers globally, and the way we use signals is sometimes tied to the industry that they operate in, and then we have a lot of research to say how that industry is doing and whether the changes or the products or the features we are bringing are relevant to that industry. Other times it is B2C environment, not a B2B environment, where you got to really localize, but also think about how do you reach that customization at scale. And fortunately, these days with machine learning, with data science, there are so many powerful tools for us to kind of still have those customized nuggets and pull them out in an automated way. So we rely heavily on some of those tools to actually prioritize the customers and think about their journeys. And finally, I would say the meat of all of this is in the results, right? So can you prove it for the customer in the end, right? So whatever you do in their journey, it's important to set those goals that are measurable, even if those are small, right? Like, for example, in the first month, if you expect them to have a drop in their sales, in the second month, if you expect them to have a hyper growth in certain conversions, we have to have those attribution measures in place and take them through that journey and show them the success over a period of time. we look at that in a few different ways across the customer life cycle. And I think the signals vary depending on customer's journey. But just to kind of put this in a very simple perspective, right? If we think about a new customer, a potential customer who's trying to still evaluate the product and the offering, the signals would be very different, right? Which kind of point to the value of the lifetime value of the customer, the offering at hand, how does the interplay look like, and what is it that the customer is trying to optimize, and does our offering kind of really talk to that? So generating kind of initial leads that you work with and kind of and acquire those is a very different sort of set of signals, right? You may or may not want to target a certain geography, a certain industry, or a certain market segment. But so it's a whole set of kind of basket of signals here. But the next stage really is an existing customer, a customer that you have, and within that, some customers may be just growing, some may be declining, and some may be just kind of plateauing in their journey. So how do you kind of look at their goals versus kind of their journey with you? For example, if somebody came in and they really wanted to measure how successful they are in getting conversions on their website, right? And they're selling into SEO, SEM kind of product. How do you then kind of optimize it for the customer and say, hey, for this segment, my goals were kind of really reducing the cost of conversion versus for this segment, my goals were increasing traffic. So depending on the goals of each segment, then one can kind of really define the signals on what do we really care about. And I would say the goal of every sales interaction is not about just increasing your own revenue, but it's kind of creating a win-win, right? And a win-win looks very different for different segments. And then the last kind of segment that I think in a customer's life cycle is when they're actually sort of becoming inactive, or they're lapsing, or they're no longer wanting to work with you, or maybe they're kind of also spending a lot more on the competition. So that's kind of sometimes the most ignored and very scaled segment, right? And the idea here is to stop that leaky bucket. So the signals here change from growth and revenue, which was there in the previous segment, to more like how much leakage is happening, and how do you arrest that leakage, even if that requires investing from your own wallet rather than actually getting back any returns in the beginning. So the signals there would kind of really be about the activity levels, the degrowth, if you're seeing that, or even lapse rates, and putting them kind of trying to reverse that trend, and kind of feed back into all of that. And I think the final thing that kind of a lot of us in sales teams are actually now beginning to become very excited about is throughout this life cycle, there are learnings on the product, right? So sometimes the product is way too complex and it doesn't work for some customers. In other cases, the product is not serving the needs of the scale that they have. So are we kind of capturing that in a systematic way and trying to improve our own offering? I think that loop has to kind of continuously work together for the sales cycle to just become better and better and more effective over a period of time. Well, that's a tough one. And I wouldn't say it's easy, but I think a couple of best practices from my side that I think work well. So I do have like a sort of a happy hour on Monday that I spend on myself, actually just reading up on a lot of what's going on in the industry, what's going on with the product, and what's going on with other companies that are on my watch list. So I think it's kind of really carving out that time. The second one is identifying your resources that you're going to refer to in that time. So one has to be very thoughtful. The information is just so vastly available these days that it's just so easy to get lost in the regular feed the one gets every day. So some of kind of my favorites are really the research by Harvard, some of the Google Think tools that actually throw up very, very customized reports. And also kind of, looking at some of the Bloomberg activities. But I think each to their own. I arrived at those resources and they work well. I'm also increasingly getting very passionate about mindfulness and at work. So I think that's a completely different topic, maybe not related to sales, but honestly, in some of the toughest sales meetings, I think that has been my best tool of late.